Velkommen til Kees Klomp.
Good morning. That was too fast for me to understand. I understood two words, communist and Buddhist. And I promise I won't bother you with both. I'm going to discuss economics with you. So let me get my microphone so I can walk around a bit. Are my slides visible for all of you? Okay, cool. So I'm a professor of applied science at the Rotterdam University of Applied Science. And what I'm going to share with you today is the transformation theory that I work with to change the economic curriculum in the Netherlands. So my task in the next 5 years is to change economics education in the Netherlands. We have 20,000 students per year at our own university. They all study economics. And what I will share with you today is that in my humble opinion, the core crisis that we are facing is not a climate crisis, it's not a corona crisis, but it's an existential crisis. And we have to look in a fundamentally different way at the way that we do economics, that we perceive economics, that we work with. So that is what I'm going to share with you today. So it will be about climate change, it will be about COVID, but most of it will be about transformation, a fundamental societal transformation starting with economics. So I have an hour, so I try to get my talk done in 45 minutes, so we have room for Q&A, and otherwise I will be around later today to discuss or answer any of your questions. So we are having a climate conference a week after IPCC presented its 6th report. So just to get a grip of where we are today, who read this last report? Who read the summary? Good. Okay, good. So just to be on the same page again, do we agree that what Greta Thunberg said a couple of years ago is not over-exaggerated? Do we agree? Yes? Yes. Panic is not a really healthy emotion, but I think she is right. And what I will try to share with you today is how do we deal with this? How do we deal with the fact that we are creating behavior that is fundamentally destructive and in the end also very destructive for our own species and longevity. So in my humble opinion, the core problem of both the COVID crisis, climate crisis, and far more worse, the biodiversity crisis that is taking shape, is the way that we perceive economics and economy. So there is a very strong correlation between all these crises that are happening and the way that we are driving economics, which is based upon continuously creating economic growth. So it's no coincidence that there is an economic or that there is an ecological crisis going on. It's caused, and it's caused by economics. So if we want to change, not only fighting the symptoms that we are doing now, like with COVID, we are all vaccinated, but that's only fighting symptoms. And also climate change, of course we can draw down CO2, but it's not what's causing climate change. Climate change is caused by our behavior, and especially by our economic behavior. So we have to look in a different way to economics. So the purpose economics imperative that I work with is that we need to rethink economics. This has, by the way, this has nothing to do with communism. This is ecology. This is ecology. It's not political. We need system change. This is also really important. You know, the Great Reset thing, and I'm using polite words. I could use other words. It's no system change. It's also superficial. It's also symptomic, and we need structural change. We need a life-sustaining paradigm, and I will get back to this, because what we are creating now is actually life-destructive instead of life-sustaining. So it's not about sustainability, it's about life-sustaining. And we need a new normal. So that's basically the starting point for my professorship and for my work at the university. So the starting point is that purpose economics is existential. So we are, as a species, in an existential challenge, an existential crisis. And let me explain what I mean with existential, because existential has two sides, and they are interrelated. So the first one is obvious. That's why I ask you about the IPCC report. We are, as a collective, as a species, in an existential crisis. It doesn't get any prettier than this. I mean, it's out there. It's getting more clear by the day. And again, don't over-exaggerate climate change. Don't get me wrong. I'm as alarmed as you. But we are having an ecological crisis. The basis of our crisis is our disturbed relationship with our natural surroundings. That's the basis. And that's an existential crisis. And I will work with two terms, and I will show you that there's a difference between those two, and they are also related, which is purpose and meaning. And in most cases, purpose and meaning are used as two words for the same phenomenon, and it's actually not true. They are two distinct phenomena, but they are joined together. So when we talk about purpose, purpose is an experience. So I don't know how it is in Denmark, but in the Netherlands, a lot of companies and also public offices work with purpose, and they present purpose as a higher goal. Does that make sense? Does it also you like you? But you know, Shell has a purpose as well. So and we can use really fancy words to describe what we're doing, but 10 years ago, that sort of purpose was called a mission statement. And there's nothing wrong with a mission statement, but that's what it is. Purpose is an experience where we, as humans, experiencing and recognizing, acknowledging the fact that we are part of something bigger. So we, whether we are aware of it or not, we are nature. We are interrelated and interconnected with every living thing out there. And we share one and the same biosphere. And this is the tough lesson that we are learning now. With COVID, with climate change, with biodiversity loss, it all comes down to the same phenomena, and that is that we are part of something. And because of our westernized lifestyle for the last couple of 100 years, we have grown, we are alienated from this experience. When we look at our indigenous brothers and sisters, for them, the living reality, the fact that they are part of something bigger, is very vivid. You know, for Aboriginals or Native Americans, they live in a world that is completely soulified. For us, that's more difficult. We have created the distance. We think we are above or besides nature rather than a part of nature. But purpose is recognizing the fact that we are nature. And I'm sorry, there's some Buddhism in this. And I don't know if you're familiar, but this is actually, the word interbeing is a word that is coined by a Buddhist teacher called Thich Nhat Hanh. But this is actually, you could also read it as the definition of ecology. What it basically says is nothing in the universe exists without an interconnected relationship with something else. We all inter-are. So there is no way that we can look at ourselves. And also, and this is one of the structural, fundamental problems with our economy, there is no such thing as an isolated, autonomous economy. Economy is ecology. And we have to respect that. So we created this thing called economy, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's part of ecology. And if we don't treat it as part of ecology, we end up with crisis. Like COVID, like climate, like biodiversity. So it's deep. So this is the basis, interbeing. We are interrelated with each other and with every other thing on this living planet. And then there's also the personal, individual context of existentialism. So there's also the fact that we, as beings, human beings, we want to experience a meaningful life. We want to experience that our lives matter. It's part of our embodiment. We need meaning in our lives. And it's food for the soul, so to say. So this is also really fundamental. That we want proper jobs, we want to make money, we want healthy relationships, we want friends, etc. But we also need meanings in our life. We want to experience meaning. And how do we experience meaning? And this is something that you can also check with yourself. We experience meaning when we do stuff that is not about ourselves, but is about others. When we transcend our self-interest and we do stuff for other people or for other beings, that is the moment that we experience meaning. Do you recognize this? Yeah. So it's never selfish in that sense. It's always pro-social. Yeah. And I hope now that you can see that there is a relationship between these two. Yeah. So the reason why there is such a thing as the purpose economy, why there is an internationally trend going on, that more and more people are seeking meaning in their lives and are also showing behavior that is about pursuing meaning, is the fact that our common existence is more and more under threat. Yeah? So they are related. So our individual behavior is connected to our collective situation. Yeah? And that is why we are more and more showing behavior that I like to call interliving, the active translation of interbeing. So interbeing is a fact. It's ecology. And now we are going to show more and more ecologically sound behavior. And I call it interliving because it's life-based, it's life-centric, it's life-savvy, it's life-affirming, life-strengthening, and life-serving. And this is basically what thriving is all about. And so if you look at ecosystems, they thrive. And thrive has everything to do with the system and not with the individual organisms within the system. So there's a fundamental difference between biology and ecology. Ecology is system biology. So we need to get our head around system thinking and system acting. So what happens with the purpose economy and the purpose economic process is it starts with internalizing. So we experience the fact that we are part of something bigger. So it's from out there inward, which is about processing. And then because we acknowledge it, we are showing behavior, we are manifesting meaningful behavior. So we recognize our existence and we are showing existential behavior. This is the deepest layer of what I like to call purpose economy. And to put it in other words, the basis of purpose economy thinking is that we experience life as the greatest good and that we are serving life as the greatest goal. And when we serve life, when we serve needs that are bigger than our own needs, that is the moment that we experience meaning in our lives. Does that make sense? Good. And somebody who has written this down very beautifully is an American ecologist, and she's also Native American, Robin Wall Kimmerer. And what she says is, knowing that you love the earth changes you, activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street to a sacred bond. Can you feel that? For us Westerners, this is really difficult stuff. For a Native American, this is everyday's business. Loving the earth and the earth loving you in return. And don't get me wrong, I'm not asking you to become tree huggers. I just ask you to open up your mind and especially heart to experience a relationship with life, with that is beyond your individuality. So this is the theoretical basis, existentialism. So when we apply this to economy, then in my humble opinion, and this is what I'm trying to get off the ground in the Netherlands, is that we have to treat economy as I like to call it, post-economics. So in my humble opinion, this crisis, this era in time that we are facing, demands the end of economics. And don't get me wrong, I'm not about. I don't want to abolish the economy or economics. I just want to change our relationship with the fundamentals of economy. And to show you the process and the development that I think that we are going, I want to share a slide with you. This is a slide by an American professor called John Fullerton, and he invented regenerative economics. And what he basically shows is that the current economic system that we are living in is the neoclassical economics. Are you familiar with neoclassical economics? So we think that we are living in an economy and that the economy is always just the economy. None of that is true. We are living in a neoclassical economic system. There are many, many, many different schools of economic thinking. And one of them is neoclassical. And that's already really important to distinct. Economics and economy is not the same as neoclassical economics. So currently, also in Denmark, we are living in a neoclassical economic system. And there's nothing wrong with neoclassical economics, as long as you know that it is neoclassical. That there's more out there, that we can learn from other ways of looking at the economy. And one of the schools of new economic thinking is called environmental economics. Started in the 60s. And what environmental economics basically does is acknowledging the fact that we have to respect the environment. So this is basically the birthplace of all the sustainability efforts that we have seen in the last couple of years. And from environmental economics, a new school started around the 80s, which is called ecological economics. Herman Daly is one of the big economists of that school. And what Daly and other economists from the ecological economics school basically said is that the economy is always embedded in society and always embedded in ecology. So that's why he said ecology first. But I think that we are even going one step further, and John Fullerton calls this regenerative economics, and that is the fact that, well, basically we have to let go of the term economics and basically treat economics as applied ecology. So all life on Earth is entangled. So it's not embedded economy, it's entangled. So you, as you are sitting here, you are entangled beings. You are ecology. Whether you are aware of it or not, whether you like it or not, you are ecology. Your company is ecology because it is entangled with every other living species on this planet. Your household is ecology. Your work at the public office is ecology. It's all ecology. So we have to change our perspective on the role of economy. So to help you get to grasp with this thinking, I'm going to share a couple of slides with you to clarify this. So if you look at the current way that we treat economy, it's the inner circle. The Neoclassical Economics school is egocentric. It's based on the fact that we are rationally operating persons, the Homo economicus, yes, and we are all pursuing our self-interest. And this is what drives the economy. So because we, individuals, want to serve our self-interest, we are showing economic behavior. Trade-offs. So this is basically what we are doing now. And the wonderful thing about COVID and about climate, but the climate crisis, is that it helped us to evolve to the second circle that we are actually right in at this moment, which is that we respect the fact that we can't only pursue self-interest anymore. We can't only look at economics from an individual perspective. We have to deal as a society, as humanity. So in Denmark, in the Netherlands, the only way that we can beat COVID is with the collective. And we have to respect each and every one within that collective, but we know that if we don't come up with collective international solutions to this problem, it won't be solved. Climate change is the same, even more concrete and even more severe. If we don't act as a global society, we will never ever get the CO2 emissions down the way that we need to accomplish. So the wonderful thing about COVID is that it helps us to transform and broaden our scope. We can't only think about our self-interest. We can't only think about Denmark or the Netherlands or your household. We have to go beyond this. And this also means that we have to show pro-social behavior, that we sometimes have to do stuff that are anti-self-interest, but are serving the bigger cause. But I think that the future will demand an even bigger step, a bigger broadening of the scope, and that is that we have to leave our human-centric, our humanity-centric perspective on life and integrate a life-centric perspective, which includes all living on the planet. And that is ecology. Ecology is basically relation science. It's accepting the fact that everything on this planet lives and is interrelated for its own existence with each and every other being on this planet. So this is where we are evolving towards. What it also means is that we have to put ecology in the first place rather than the economy. And I hope I'm not offending people with this. It's not my intention. But we are living in an economic-dominated society. So in the Netherlands, our government calls our country openly a company. And it says basically, it translates really lousy, but it basically, our prime minister says, you know, it's the Holland BV, which is the Holland. It's an organizational form that we use for companies. So our prime minister basically says that if the economy grows, if all goes well with the economy, all goes well with the Netherlands. And that's a very shameful, fatal failure. That's really, really fundamentally wrong. A healthy society is much and much more than only gross domestic product. And this is the wonderful thing about climate change. And don't get me wrong, climate change is horrendous. But this is wonderful because it all starts with awareness. You can only change what you acknowledge. And we are starting to acknowledge the fact that we are living in an economic reality. We find it completely normal to look at ourselves, to look at nature, and to look at society from a financial perspective. Nature is capital. The way that you are sitting here, you are either a producer or a consumer, because that is basically all the GDP is around. If you don't produce or consume, you don't exist. And you know, you know that a healthy society, a healthy citizen, is much and much more. I'm absolutely sure that Lemvig is much more than only producer and consumer, isn't it? Yes. So why don't we integrate that thinking more openly into our economic field? It's really important. It's really important. So we have to change the way that we look at ourselves, the way that we look at each other, the way that we look at companies, the way that we look at society. And we have to acknowledge this wonderful quote by the World Economic Forum: without ecology, there can be no economy. And this is the karma bit that is taking shape now. We are making all these decisions that are helping the economy, but are demolishing the ecology. And the only thing that we will end up is with more destruction for the economy in a later stage. Because the most important lesson that we can learn from ecology is that all life on Earth is a feedback system. The reason that we're in shit at this moment is because we caused it. There's no other way around it. It's caused by our behavior. So if we change our behavior, this is the wonderful news again. Change the behavior, change the conditions. So we have to change. It's up to us. So what we need to do, and this is why I use these two big pillars, existentialism and alignment. We have to align economics with natural system, living system principles. We have to acknowledge the fact that we have to learn a lot from nature. Nature has been around for almost 4 billion years. And this is a wonderful thing that we can learn from the Native Americans. I will share you a bit about my upcoming book. And one of the writers in my upcoming book, I asked a couple of non-economists to give their view on economy. Lots of ecologists, socialists, sociologists, not socialists, well maybe, anthropologists. And one of them is Robin Wall Kimmerer. I showed her a quote, and she is an ecologist from America, but she's also a Native American from the Pony tribe. And in their tribe, they treat us, human beings, as the youngest kid on the block. So we think of ourselves as, you know, we're on top of the of life. You know, we are the most intelligent species. But for the Native Americans, we're the young kid on the block. Plants have been around billions of years longer, so they're much more wise than we are. We have to learn everything. So we have to learn from the plants. We have to learn from fungi, because those forms of life have been and have sustained much longer than we have. This is their perspective. So align, and maybe this is the most important one. We have to change from an economical system, an economical society, civilization, to an ecological civilization. And again, it doesn't mean that we all have to become environmental activists and tree huggers. It means that we have to acknowledge the fact that we are 100%, not less, 100% dependent on the health of our living system for our own health. It's so simple. It's so simple, and yet it's so difficult for us to acknowledge and integrate it into our behavior. So aligned economics is a smorgasbord of different approaches and economic principles that I wrote a book about this, and I'm so sorry, but because of COVID, our publisher went berserk, and he wanted to postpone the book for October. So I don't have copies yet with me. I just received the first printing copy, so it's coming. But I have tried to discover and develop a couple of new fundamentals, with a couple of people. And maybe you know a couple of them also in Denmark. Are you familiar with, for instance, Kate Raworth with the donut economy? Yeah, so she's in the book. and John Fullerton that I just showed you with Regenerative Economics, and also Helena Norberg with local economics. So all people that have a fundamentally different, non-neoclassical way of looking at our economy. And I just want to share a couple of basic learnings and principles with you that I think and I hope that you can help you with this existential new way of looking at ourselves and looking at ourselves in relationship to all the other existence on this planet. And first, the first is this one, and I think images say a lot more than words, and I love this image. And it basically shows the transformation that we are in. So if you go all the way to the left, you see that this is basically the way that we have looked towards ourselves and the rest of nature since the Enlightenment, since the invention of science, basically. Well, it's maybe even earlier. Yeah, but what we see is that man is dominating and controlling the rest of nature. And yes, man is also dominating women. And this is basically the core of our culture. This is westernized thinking in one image for you. And if we are being very positive and polite, we can look around and say, you know, it brought us a lot. It brought us welfare. It brought us wealth. It brought us living standards. But by now we also know that it had a substantial amount of costs as well. And this is why we are transforming, and we're now in the middle. I think we are now in the eco stage, where we acknowledge the fact that we as humans are, you know, we're nothing special. Our intelligence is nothing special. We are just one of the billions of sorts and species out there. And we have to come to terms with that. But I think that the future will be post-anthropocenic, and the word that's been used now is seva, and seva is Sanskrit for serving. So I think that we will work towards a situation where we are going to use our tremendous capacities as human beings to cooperate. We have these tools, our hands, we have our brains, and we've been using it in a very destructive, degenerative way. But if we can change our perception of reality and change the perception of our role, then we can change our behavior and turn it into a positive behavior. There are zillions of examples of this taking place. Rewilding processes, regenerative agriculture. It's all out there. It's nothing special. The only thing is we need to scale it up. It has to become mainstream. But I think seva is the name of the game. The other thing that's really important is that we have to accept and respect foundational capital. And this is the donut from Kate Raworth. And basically what she introduced in the economic system is an ecological ceiling and a social foundation. She basically says we can't cross those. If we cross the ecological system, we are creating degenerative damage to the planet and therefore ourselves. And if we cross the social foundation, we are doing the same, but then to other human beings. So we don't need a growing economy, we need a just economy. And that is the shape of the donut. We have to keep the economy down. That's basically treating economy as a design science. We have to design an economy that respects the foundational capitals of this planet, both socially and environmentally. Another way to look at it, this is I think also one of the fundamental, is that we have to think regenerative. And this is another image by John Fullerton. And what John Fullerton has done, and I love this image, is he basically created a roadmap. So we come from conventional business practices, neoclassical conventional business practices. And the best way to describe them is by paraphrasing Milton Friedman. And the only business of business is business. As long as business makes money, that's good for the economy, and that's good for our living standards, it's good for the wealth, good for GDP. And we have done tremendously with that paradigm for tens of years. The only problem is that we learned by now that it also came with a price. It created social and especially environmental degeneration. So we are moving in the right direction. And at this moment, it's my opinion, we are smacked in the middle. We are living in the sustainability era. So we are living in an era where we accept and respect the fact that a lot of conventional business practices are degenerative and destructive, and that we have to take responsibility. But what you can see in this wonderful model is that it's only halfway. And actually the tipping point, you might be familiar with that, is called circular economy. A circular economy is an economy that doesn't create surplus, but also doesn't damage. But what John is offering us, what Valentin is offering us, is that there is a bunch of potential out there where we can invite companies to not only pursue financial purpose or financial profit, but also societal profit. So I think we will move towards an era where we will not only look at companies from a strictly financial perspective, but from an integral perspective, where we find it as normal that a company creates, for instance, biodiversity profit as it does financial profit. And at this moment, I'm absolutely sure it's also in Lemvig. Maybe if I would go to the baker, and this is one of the assignments that I give my students, I send them to the baker to buy a bread and ask if they can pay with biodiversity. They never succeed. Because we created this system based upon money. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with money. Money is just, you know, it's the oil in the machine. The only problem with money is that it makes it impossible to create value that isn't portrayed in the price. So the problem with money, that price becomes value. So if a company creates biodiversity value, the only way that we can value it is through money. And that is a problem. Because biodiversity profit is intangible. It's immaterial. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and I've no idea how far this is in Denmark, but I know in the Netherlands there's a lot of things happening with gross national well-being, with broader metrics of measuring value in general. So this is really important. The future is about societal profit, ecological profit, social profit, besides only financial profit. And another word that's been using is system value. And system value is basically the successor of shared value and shareholder value. So if you look at the old paradigm, conventional business practices, it's all shareholder value based. You have a company, it has to serve its shareholders, therefore it has to maximize its profit. And the only way that companies are able to do it is to create a false sense of reality based upon the fact that there is such a thing as the business, which is autonomous and isolated and has nothing to do with society or the environment. And again, this is what we have been doing for tens of years. We have externalized social and environmental cost outside of the economy. We have companies that are really, really successful, shareholder based, that created societal havoc. But we took it for granted because we served the shareholder value model. At this moment, we are in the era of sustainability, and that goes with the shared value model. And as you can see, the shared value model respects the fact that there is a relationship between business and society. There is no way that a company has no relationship with society or the environment. It's impossible. So whether you like it or not, whether the company is aware of it or not, every company creates integral value, positive or negative. And that's why, and this is a slide by the people from Future Fit Foundation, which is an international think tank, and they installed system value, which basically says that the future goal, the future perspective of business is that business serves society and serves the environment. So it's a complete flip, and 180 flip of the situation that we created, from completely isolated and autonomous which is a delusion, to completely integrated and inclusive. Yeah? So this is a new principle in business. And a term that also comes with it, and again, I don't know if you're familiar with this term in Denmark, but we are using this now more and more in the Netherlands, is we call this rights holdership. And so you're familiar with shareholdership. I think you're also familiar with stakeholdership, which is all the people that are associated with the company, which have a stake in the company but don't have shares. But rights holdership goes even one step further and acknowledges the fact that there are zillions of beings out there that have no influence whatsoever on the business, but are influenced by the business. So if you take, for instance, the zillions of forms of living in the topsoil, so that living is very much influenced by industrial intensive agriculture for obvious reasons. But it isn't able to influence agriculture by itself, but we are influencing it. And the problem is that by influencing it, we are also, in a later stage, influencing ourselves, which is what we are learning right now. And so rights holdership is radically inclusive. Radically inclusive. And it means that each and every company or organization has to pursue gross positive targets. Gross positive targets. And that's really different from most sustainability efforts that we see in environmental and social governance, ESG, at this moment, which is basically about companies that are doing their utmost best to do less bad. But it's only incremental. From a system perspective, they're still creating damage and degeneration. So we have to get our head around how do we create integral value? How do we create inclusive profit? How can we make money work for instance, all those living beings in the topsoil of our earth, rather than using this life to create money? And so we have to think in a systemic way. And again, the good news. How am I time-wise, guys? Oh, okay. The good news is, again, that because of the turbulence we are facing right now, a lot of stuff is happening. So the beyond GDP movement, as it's called, is becoming bigger and bigger. So there's a lot of criticism on GDP. It's becoming really broad. I sampled a couple of examples of those criticism in headlines, and I left the sources with these claims so that you can see that are not anarchist or communist, socialist fanzines, but this is hardcore business. Harvard Business Review, World Finance, OECD. So from within the current system, the current normal, the current economic normal, we see more and more criticism on GDP as an indicator of societal health. And on the other side, we see the rise of companies, and especially New Zealand is really working with this, of what is called gross national well-being or gross national happiness, and the difference between those two. And in the Netherlands we call it broad wealth. But the difference is that we don't use one indicator, namely GDP, economic growth, but we use 60. So in the Netherlands we have 64. Gross national well-being in New Zealand is based upon 61 indicators. And the difference between those two is that it's about balance. So we in the Netherlands had the assumption that if wealth grows, if the economy grows and wealth grows, that means that well-being is growing as well. And we've learned that this is not the case. By the way, we've learned that this is the case since the 1970s. So since the 1970s, and this is what economists call overdevelopment. And I'm pretty sure that Denmark is an overdeveloped country as well, which means that there is GDP growth, but only at the expense of well-being. So in the Netherlands, just to give you an example, and I can only imagine that it will be similar in Denmark, our economy has grown 300% since the 1970s. So we in the Netherlands have become 3 times wealthier, only at the expense of well-being. So our perception of well-being has decreased since the 1970s, and GDP has grown. So you have this huge gap between those two. And this is what is called overdevelopment, which has a lot to do with environmental fear, social insecurity. So so there's a difference between the top line of economic growth and our perception of well-being, so to say. And this is what Jacinda Ardern, as the Prime Minister, has taken really serious, and she changed it around. And what a lot of people don't know is how courageous it was, because the reason she left GDP and installed gross national well-being is because she had a huge problem with mental health of youth in New Zealand. So New Zealand was the country after South Korea and Japan with the highest suicide rate underneath teens. And the reason of this high suicide rate was economic pressure. So she had to make a bold decision to prioritize the mental health of young kids. And that she could only do it by making the economy less important, and she did. And she created this movement, and it's really interesting for you to dive into it. It's called We Go, the well-being governments. And now we have 5 countries in the world: New Zealand, Scotland, Wales, Iceland, and Finland. And soon also Costa Rica and Canada will join. And they call themselves the well-being governments. So they all officially left GDP and reinstalled gross national well-being. So they're working with 61 indicators rather than just one. And again, this is, I think, a really fundamental development taking place. And the word that we are using to describe this new paradigm isn't sustainability anymore, but it's called thrivability. And it's also an ecologist perspective, because the epitome of a healthy ecosystem is a thriving ecosystem. And ecosystems thrive when there is an abundant amount of patterns and procedures that are based upon sharing. So sustainability, the problem with the term sustainability is the part sustain. So sustaining is about, as you know, the triple P, people, planet, and profit. So what you see in most cases that are companies that pursue sustainability, they also keep pursuing the existing business model. So they just take societal responsibility into account. So they change their ways, but they don't change the way that they do business. They don't start to pursue biodiversity profit. They just want to pursue a reduction of biodiversity loss. And don't get me wrong, that is a phenomenal and a very important step. But we have to change the system. We have to create a fundamentally new way for companies to be part of the system in a very positive way. So that's why the new lingo, so to say, is thrivability rather than sustainability, because it's all about thrivability. And the way that we see this work from an accounting perspective, a reporting perspective, is what I like to call return on interbeing. And this is an example of one of the most exciting companies, I think, in the world. And they're Dutch, but they work internationally. And I really advise you to check them out. They're called Commonland. And Commonland is basically a company. What they do is they help to regenerate degenerated pieces of land. So they gather around and they acquire big plots of land, about the size of Luxembourg, just to give you an example. And by regenerating the soil, they are basically regenerating society, the people that living, regenerating culture, and also regenerating the economy. And the founder, Willem Verber, is a Dutch guy. He wrote a book about his philosophy, and he developed what he calls the 4 returns. So you put $1 in, and you get a 4 return in return. And the wonderful thing about the 4 returns is that it doesn't only return more money than you've put into it, but you also get a return of inspiration, a return of social capital, and a return on natural capital. And the wonderful thing is, and you can see, the book is in English, and you can download it for free on his website, is that he basically created the world's first non-monetary return system. So he found a way to measure and report social profit and natural profit in a non-monetary way. And it's working. It's working this well that they bought a plot of land in Australia. It's all about the size of the Netherlands. And they created their first, how do you translate this? This is difficult. Like the stock market, yes. Stock market placed company there. So they created a company which is basically producing regenerative organic soil material, and they're translating it in all sorts of products, and they are now stock listed in Australia. So they've become a really big economic system as well by creating biodiversity profit. So it's a wonderful example. Check it out. I think this is the future. I'm running out of time, eh? So let me leave this for. I was a bit too enthusiastic. I'm sorry. Happens to me all the time. I want to leave you with this, and I think this is This is one of the quotes for one of the essayists in my book, Charles Eisenstein. Don't know if you're familiar with him. He's an American philosopher. And what he basically describes in his essay, and for me this was a game changer, he says there are basically 3 levels that we can look and perceive reality. Systems rest on top of systems, and systems rest on top of stories. So if we look at COVID, we have the tendency to look at it from a symptomic perspective. You know, we have a problem, we have vaccines, let's get it out there. And then it's solved. But there's a system underneath. COVID has been caused. It's no accident, it's no coincidence. And of course it is. Don't get me wrong, it's based upon an incident. But it's zoonotic. It has to do with a system that doesn't respect the distance between us as a species and the rest of the species on this living planet. And what Charles Eisenstein is offering us, and I think that is phenomenal, is the discovery that we don't need to pursue system change, because system change only results in revolutions or in all sorts of negative bullshit. The fact that what we need to change is our story. So have a closer look towards yourselves. You know, who am I? Why what is the reason that I'm living on this place? What do I need? What makes me happy? And if we are able to look this fundamentally, this existential towards ourselves, I think that we can create a new story which enables us to get very positive symptoms rather than all the negative symptoms that we are creating now, because they are all based upon a story. So the current story needs to change. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope it works for you. And sorry for going on too long.
Please stay for a minute.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Kees.
Can I get a bit of water?
Yes, of course, and it's clean from here. Take a piece of water, yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Kees Klomp, for this tour de force through the thoughts of changing not only our climate, but our whole world. Now it's open for questions. Tak til Kees Klomp for hele den her tour de force. Der er åben for spørgsmål nu, så have endelig en finger i vejret. Og jeg synes da bare, at vi skal gå i gang. Nina er klar med mikrofonen. Jeg har 1000 spørgsmål, men jeres spørgsmål er garanteret meget bedre. So now questions and perhaps in English, I don't know, we'll try to translate. Okay, and let me just say, lad mig lige sige til alle, der følger herude, at hele den her seance senere vil blive lagt ud med tekster, så vidt jeg er orienteret. Jeg kigger lige over her, og får den ikke? Ja, det bliver tekstet og lagt ud senere, så man kan altså få det også i en version med oversættelse på. Og nu åbner vi så for spørgsmål. Det første kommer her fra salen. Værsgo.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
I'm totally aboard on your analysis and your story, if I can say that. But on a more practical level, you know, for example, Lemvig, if they want to be part of a movement moving from neoclassical economy to applied ecology, whatever, what would be your recommendation for Eric, the mayor here, next town council meeting, where to start?
Yeah. Yeah, that's always the tension and the challenge between the macro perspective and micro practice. But I think it all starts with acknowledging the ecological reality. So if we are able to acknowledge that, then we can change legislation and practices on a micro level. I do think, and also in the Netherlands, this is really